I was standing in the middle of the Henderson Gallery, microphone in hand, surrounded by journalists and art collectors who had paid $200 per ticket to hear me speak about my collection, when my father burst through the glass doors screaming that I had destroyed our family. Security had to physically drag him out while cameras flashed, and my mother sobbed dramatically about how ungrateful I was. That moment, watching my parents being escorted out of my first solo exhibition like common criminals, was the sweetest validation I had ever experienced in my 21 years of life. But before you judge me, before you think I am some cold-hearted monster who threw her family to the wolves, let me take you back to where this all started. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe because trust me, you will want to hear how someone invisible became impossible to ignore. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Let me rewind to the beginning, to the life I lived before everything exploded. My name is Alara Carter, and for most of my life, I was a ghost in my own home. We lived in a picture-perfect suburban house in Westchester, the kind that looked like the American dream from the outside. My father Richard ran Carter & Company, a consulting firm for small businesses. My mother Catherine had quit her pharmaceutical sales job to support the family. Then there was Tiffany, my older sister by 3 years, blonde and bubbly with a YouTube channel called Tiff's Tips where she posted makeup tutorials and lifestyle content. Our parents adored her, buying her equipment, bragging about her follower count at dinner parties. I was the opposite. Dark-haired, quiet, more comfortable sketching in my room than performing for people. I had been creating art since I was 7, discovering jewelry design in high school. At 17, I opened an Etsy shop called Alara Designs, making maybe $300 or $400 a month. It was not much, but it was mine. Validation that I had something to offer even if my family never noticed. The exploitation started gradually. When my father's business hit a rough patch during my senior year, they began asking for small favors. $40 until Friday, help with the grocery bill. Just this once. I was working at a bookstore and saving for college, but they were my parents. They said it was temporary, that they would pay me back. They never did. By 18, requests became expectations. My mother sat me down and explained they needed to add my name to the business LLC to look more legitimate to investors. They used words like opportunity, building credit, smart financial move. Desperate for their approval, I signed without reading carefully. I gave them my social security number. I trusted them completely. That trust became the foundation of their exploitation. In community college, my paychecks went straight to my family. My mother convinced me to open a joint checking account for household expenses, but shared meant I contributed and they withdrew. I would deposit my paycheck Friday, and by Monday there would be charges to restaurants I had never been to, stores I had never shopped at. When I questioned it, my mother sighed like I was being difficult, reminding me I lived rent-free. That family helped family. My father dismissed my concerns with distracted waves, once saying he thought I understood we all pitched in here, as if depleting my account was like taking out trash. Meanwhile, Tiffany's channel grew to 50,000 subscribers. Every family dinner revolved around her latest video, her engagement rates, her brand deals. I sat pushing food around my plate while my mother gushed about Tiffany's entrepreneurial spirit and my father showed me her videos on his phone. No one asked about my jewelry sales or art classes or anything in my life. The financial abuse escalated. At 19, my mother intercepted a credit card offer and suggested I apply, saying it would build diverse credit. I got approved with a $5,000 limit. 3 weeks later, I was near the limit. My mother had added herself as authorized user and charged boutique clothes, salon visits, expensive dinners, a spa weekend. When I confronted her, she called me selfish, promised to pay me back when Dad's business improved. She never did. I made minimum payments for 2 years while she continued using it. Tiffany's expenses became my burden too. New cameras, lighting equipment, a $900 social media conference in Miami, all from my accounts because their cards were maxed. When I objected, my mother said I should support my sister's dreams, that I should be proud to contribute to Tiffany's future success. The psychological toll was worse than the financial one. I felt like my only value was as a resource to be tapped. No one came to my community college art show. When I mentioned selling a custom necklace for $250, my mother glanced up for 5 seconds, said, "That's nice, dear," and returned to Tiffany's newest upload. I withdrew into my bedroom, my makeshift studio with a desk by the window, walls covered with sketches, shelves of art books. It was my sanctuary, the only space that felt like mine. But even that was not safe. Tiffany barged in without knocking to raid my supplies for video props. My mother left laundry piles or asked me to watch the house, never mind if I was working on something complex. My father barely entered at all, which somehow felt worse. I tried convincing myself this was normal, that all families were complicated, that I was too sensitive. They were stressed about money. They were helping Tiffany achieve her potential. They loved me in their own way. But late at night, staring at the ceiling, I could not escape the hollow feeling in my chest. I felt invisible, like a supporting character existing only to prop up everyone else's storylines. 8 months before my 21st birthday, everything came to a head. Tiffany announced at Sunday dinner that a Las Vegas marketing agency wanted to meet her about securing funding to expand her channel into a full media brand. She was vibrating with excitement. My parents were instantly on board, my mother already looking at flights, my father saying they should spare no expense for Tiffany's big break. Then my father mentioned the date, April 21st. Casually, like it was just another day. April 21st was my 21st birthday. Silence. My mother looked up. My father's expression flickered with something between guilt and annoyance. Tiffany did not register the significance at all. I waited, holding my breath, hoping someone would say they could reschedule, that my milestone birthday mattered, that I would be the priority just once. My father cleared his throat, said it was unfortunate timing. I thought maybe he would suggest an alternative. Then my mother sighed, a small sound carrying so much dismissiveness it hit like a physical blow. I was 21, not 5, she said. An adult who could handle my birthday alone. Maybe a quiet day would be good for me since I spent so much time alone with my doodles anyway. What difference would one more day make? Tiffany laughed, said I could celebrate the next weekend, that birthdays were not a big deal at our age. She turned back to discussing whether to wear the navy or burgundy blazer to the investor meeting. I sat with my fork halfway to my mouth, staring at my plate, and something crystallized in my mind. This was not forgetfulness. This was choice. They were actively choosing Tiffany's ambitions over my milestone birthday without even pretending to feel conflicted. I put down my fork carefully, said it was fine, that I understood. No one noticed my voice shaking. They had already moved on to Las Vegas hotel options. That night, I lay awake until 3 a.m., feeling something shift inside me. I had spent years making excuses, convincing myself their neglect was unintentional, their exploitation temporary, that they loved me despite everything. But this felt different. This was a line being crossed. I made a decision. If they were going to ignore my birthday, I would make it impossible for them to ever forget it again. Not by throwing a tantrum or demanding attention, but by doing something that would force them to see me, really see me, for the first time in years. I started planning. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. I took on extra shifts at the bookstore. I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning working on jewelry pieces, creating new designs that were more complex and ambitious than anything I had attempted before. I started researching what it would take to turn my Etsy shop into a real business. I looked into studio rental spaces, calculated costs, and started setting aside every penny I could. But I also started documenting everything. Every unauthorized charge on my credit card, every withdrawal from our joint checking account that I had not made, every bill that got paid with my money. I kept a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and purposes. I took screenshots of my bank statements. I organized receipts into labeled folders. I also reached out to Leo Chen, my best friend from high school, who was now in his 3rd year of law school at the State University. Leo and I had stayed close even though we did not see each other as much anymore. He was one of the few people in my life who had always treated me like I mattered, who asked about my art and actually listened to the answers. When I called him one evening in late February, I told him I needed advice about a legal situation. I explained the basics of what had been happening, the business license with my name on it, the credit cards, the joint accounts. I could hear the anger in his voice when he responded. He said what they were doing sounded like financial exploitation at minimum and possibly identity theft, depending on the specifics. He said I might have legal recourse if I wanted to pursue it. I told him I did not know what I wanted yet, but I might need his help soon. He said he would be ready whenever I needed him. The weeks leading up to my birthday were surreal. My parents and Tiffany were consumed with preparation for the Vegas trip. Tiffany did practice runs of her investor pitch in the living room. My mother took her shopping for professional-looking outfits that somehow ended up on my credit card. My father made reservations at expensive restaurants near the meeting location. They talked about the trip constantly at dinner, during commercial breaks while watching TV, first thing in the morning over coffee. No one mentioned my upcoming birthday. Not once. 5 days before April 21st, I asked my mother casually if she had any plans for that week. She looked at me blankly for a moment before remembering. She said, "Oh honey, we will celebrate when we get back from Vegas, that we could go to dinner or something the following weekend." She said it in the same tone she might use to reschedule a dentist appointment, like it was a minor logistical issue rather than my 21st birthday. I nodded and said that sounded fine. She had already turned back to her laptop, scrolling through hotel amenities at the Bellagio. The night before my birthday, I decided to do something for myself. I went to the grocery store and bought ingredients to bake a cake. I chose chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite combination. I spent hours in the kitchen that evening, carefully measuring ingredients, melting chocolate on the stove, whipping cream to the perfect consistency. I baked the layers, let them cool, assembled them with precision. I made cream cheese frosting and tinted it a soft purple. Tiffany's favorite color was pink, so of course I chose purple. I decorated the cake carefully, piping "Happy 21st Birthday Alara" on top in elaborate script. I added some decorative flowers I made from fondant. It was beautiful, maybe the best cake I had ever made. I put it in the refrigerator and went to bed, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. I was still awake when I heard my parents and Tiffany come home from their last-minute preparations around 11:30. I heard them in the kitchen, voices muffled through my bedroom door. I heard the refrigerator open. I heard laughter, the clink of plates, the sound of forks scraping against ceramic. They were eating my birthday cake. The night before my birthday, they were eating the cake I had made for myself. I lay there in the dark, staring at my ceiling, listening to them devour the only acknowledgement of my birthday that existed in this house. I did not cry. I did not get up and confront them. I just lay there and felt something inside me turn to ice. The next morning, April 21st, my actual birthday, I woke up to an empty house. The silence was oppressive, heavy in a way that made it hard to breathe. I got out of bed and walked downstairs in my pajamas, my feet cold on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty plates in the sink, crumbs all over the counter. The cake plate sitting empty except for a few streaks of purple frosting and one small, mangled piece of cake that looked like it had been someone's unwanted last bite. No note, no explanation. Just the evidence of their casual disregard. On the kitchen table, positioned as if they were important documents, were 2 business-class tickets to Las Vegas. Next to them was a note scrawled on the back of a Chinese takeout menu in my mother's handwriting. "Emergency in Vegas. Stay home and be good. Back in a few days. Mom and Dad. Not happy birthday. Not we love you. Not even sorry we will miss it. Just instructions to stay home and be good, like I was a child they were leaving with a babysitter." I picked up the note and stared at it until the words blurred. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from my bank. I unlocked it with shaking hands and saw a charge notification for $5,000 to the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, charged to my credit card. The one my mother was an authorized user on, $5,000, on my birthday, without asking, without even pretending it was an emergency. Before I could fully process that, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an Instagram notification. Tiffany had just posted to her story. I opened it and saw a boomerang video of her clinking champagne glasses with my parents on an airplane. All 3 of them were grinning, looking excited and happy. The caption read, "Vegas, baby. Time to close the deal. Boss girl hustle." She had added stickers of money bags and champagne bottles. I stood in that kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of my birthday cake, holding proof that they had spent $5,000 of my money to fund my sister's dream on the one day that should have been about me. And I felt something snap inside my chest. It was not a breaking. It was a severing. A clean, precise cut through whatever threads had still connected me to this family. They had not forgotten my birthday. They had actively chosen to ignore it. They had eaten my cake and left me the crumbs. They had stolen my money and celebrated that theft on social media. This was not neglect. This was contempt. I set my phone down on the counter very carefully. I walked upstairs to my room, still moving in that strange, calm way that felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. I got dressed in jeans and a sweater. I brushed my hair and pulled it back in a ponytail. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at me. Then I picked up my phone and called Leo. He answered on the second ring, his voice still rough with sleep. It was barely 8 in the morning. Before he could even say hello, I said I needed his help, that they had gone too far, that I was done. There was a pause. Then Leo said he had been waiting for this call for 5 years. He asked me what I needed. I told him I needed to take back everything they had stolen from me. Every penny, every piece of my identity they had used for their benefit, every scrap of power they had held over me. I wanted it all back, and I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be left with nothing. Leo said he would be at my house in an hour. He told me not to do anything until he got there, that we needed to be strategic about this. I hung up and sat on my bed, waiting, feeling that strange icy calm settle over me like armor. For the first time in my life, I was not going to be the good daughter, the understanding sister, the reliable source of money and support. I was going to be something they had never seen before. I was going to be done. When Leo arrived, he came prepared. He had his laptop, a legal pad covered in notes, and a briefcase that made him look far more professional than a 24-year-old law student had any right to look. He also brought coffee and a bag of donuts, which was so thoughtful that I almost cried for the first time that day. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where those plane tickets still lay mockingly, and Leo opened his laptop. He said we needed to approach this systematically. First, we needed to understand the full scope of what they had done. Then we needed to figure out what I had the legal right to reclaim. Finally, we needed to execute the plan quickly and decisively before they could react. I pulled up my bank accounts, credit card statements, and every document I had been quietly collecting for months. Leo went through everything with the focused intensity of someone who had been preparing for this exact moment. He took notes, asked questions, and occasionally muttered things under his breath that sounded distinctly like "that is definitely illegal." After 2 hours of review, Leo sat back and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts impressed and furious. He said my family had committed multiple forms of financial exploitation and fraud. The business license situation was particularly egregious because they had used my identity to secure the LLC without my informed consent, which meant I had the right to withdraw from it. The credit card charges could be disputed as unauthorized use. The joint bank account was trickier because I had technically agreed to it, but the pattern of one-sided withdrawals could support a claim of financial abuse. He said I had more power in this situation than I probably realized. He asked me how far I wanted to take this. I looked at him across that table, in the kitchen where I had spent so many hours feeling invisible, and I said I wanted to take it all the way. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. I wanted them to understand what it was like to be used up and discarded. Leo nodded. He said we should start with the financial institutions. He pulled up a list of steps we needed to take, and we started making calls. The first call was to my bank. I explained to a sympathetic representative that I needed to address some unauthorized account activity involving family members. She put me through to the fraud department, and I spent 45 minutes on the phone detailing the situation. The fraud specialist was professional and kind, and she walked me through the process of removing myself as an authorized user from accounts I had not opened, freezing credit cards that had been used without my permission, and disputing charges that I had not made. By the time I hung up, I had frozen 5 credit cards that my parents and Tiffany had been using. The representative had also flagged my account for monitoring and helped me set up alerts for any future suspicious activity. The second call was to the credit card company where my mother had added herself as an authorized user. This conversation was more complicated because my mother technically had permission to use the card, but I explained that I wanted her removed immediately and that I intended to dispute several charges. The representative said she understood and that removal would be processed within 24 hours. Leo made notes about which charges I should formally dispute and helped me draft dispute letters that we would submit in writing to create a paper trail. Then we tackled the business situation. This was the part that made me most nervous because it felt like crossing a line from which there was no return. Leo pulled up the LLC paperwork that I had signed when I was 18. He pointed out several problems with it, including the fact that I had been barely legally an adult when I signed it, that I had not received independent legal counsel, and that I had not been informed of the full implications of what I was signing. He said I had the right to withdraw from the LLC at any time, but doing so would have significant consequences. Because my name and social security number were on the business license, my withdrawal would trigger a review of the business status. If the business could not meet licensing requirements without me, which it likely could not given my father's financial situation, the license would be suspended. I asked him what that would mean for my father's business. Leo did not sugarcoat it. He said it would effectively shut down Carter & Company until my father could restructure it properly and resolve any financial obligations tied to the LLC. I thought about all the times my father had dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand. I thought about him sitting at that investor meeting in Vegas, funded by my money, on my birthday. I told Leo to draft the withdrawal notice, It took us another 3 hours to prepare all the legal documents. Leo was meticulous, double-checking every detail, making sure everything was ironclad. We drafted a formal notice of LLC withdrawal, a cease and desist letter regarding the use of my identity for financial purposes, and a series of dispute letters for the credit card charges. By mid-afternoon, we had everything ready. Leo drove me to a UPS store where we had the LLC withdrawal notarized and sent it via certified mail to both my parents' home address and the business address on file with the state. We also sent copies to the state licensing board with a cover letter explaining the situation. Then we went to my bank in person. I asked to speak with a manager about closing my joint checking account and opening a new individual account. The manager, a woman in her 50s named Patricia who had kind eyes and seemed to sense something heavy was happening, took us into a private office. I explained that I needed to separate my finances from my family due to ongoing exploitation. Patricia did not ask many questions, just nodded and began processing the paperwork. When we pulled up the joint account balance, I was shocked to see there was actually $14,318 in it. Apparently, my parents had deposited some money recently, possibly for the Vegas trip. Not realizing I was about to take everything, Patricia transferred every penny into my new individual account. She also helped me set up additional security measures so that no one could access my new account without my explicit permission. She gave me a new debit card and made me change all my passwords right there in her office. When we walked out of that bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. I also felt terrified. I had just taken the nuclear option, and there was no going back. Leo could see the panic starting to creep in. He suggested we get dinner and talk about next steps. We went to a quiet diner a few blocks away and sat in a booth in the back corner. I ordered a grilled cheese sandwich that I mostly pushed around my plate while Leo tried to keep me grounded. He reminded me that everything I had done was legal and justified. He said my family had been exploiting me for years and that I had every right to protect myself. He also said that what I did next was entirely up to me, that I did not have to do anything more if I did not want to. But I did want to. The icy calm had settled back over me, and I realized I was not done. Taking back my money and my legal identity was important, but it was not enough. I wanted them to feel the absence of me in the same visceral way I had felt my own invisibility. I told Leo I wanted to clear out the house. Not everything, just the things that had been purchased with my money. He raised an eyebrow and asked if I was sure. I said I had never been more sure of anything in my life. We spent the rest of the evening planning. Leo helped me go through my credit card statements and bank records to identify every major purchase that had been made with my money over the past 3 years. The list was staggering. The living room sectional sofa, the dining room table and chairs, my mother's Peloton bike, my father's golf clubs, Tiffany's entire filming setup including cameras, lights, backdrops, and editing equipment. Even some of the artwork on the walls had been purchased on my credit card. Leo asked what I wanted to do with all of it. I thought about it for a long moment, then said I wanted to sell it. All of it. I wanted to liquidate every item they had bought with my money, recoup as much cash as possible, and use that money to start my actual life. Leo grinned. He said I was more ruthless than he had given me credit for, and he meant it as a compliment. The next morning, I hired a moving company that specialized in estate sales and quick relocations. I paid them extra for same-day service. I met them at my house at 8 a.m. with a detailed list of everything that needed to be moved. The movers were professional and efficient, asking no questions about why a young woman was clearing out her family home while they were out of town. We started with the big items. The sectional sofa went first, carefully wrapped and loaded onto the truck. Then the dining room set, the Peloton bike from my mother's home gym. We moved through the house systematically, and I felt no guilt, only a grim satisfaction as I watched the physical evidence of my family's lifestyle disappear. Tiffany's room was particularly satisfying. We took every piece of filming equipment, every ring light, every backdrop stand. We took her designer handbags that she displayed on floating shelves. We took the expensive makeup collection she had accumulated. I left her clothes and personal items, but everything else went. The movers loaded it all into the truck and drove it to a storage unit I had rented that morning. Then I started the second phase of my plan. I spent the rest of the day photographing everything and listing it on high-end consignment websites, eBay, and local selling apps. I priced everything to move quickly, usually about 60% of retail value. The response was immediate. My father's Callaway golf clubs sold within 2 hours for $800. My mother's designer handbags started getting offers within minutes. Tiffany's camera equipment, which had cost over $3,000 on my credit card, sold by the end of the day for $2,000. By that evening, I had sold over $12,000 worth of items, with several more pending sales. I felt no remorse, only a strange sense of justice. But I was not finished. I spent the next day making the house look deliberately empty in a way that would be impossible to ignore. I left the basics, beds and a card table in the kitchen with some folding chairs, but I stripped away everything that made it look like a successful family lived there. I took down the family photos from the walls. I removed the decorative items from shelves. I wanted them to walk into a house that looked abandoned, that felt as hollow as they had made me feel. Then I prepared my final message. I found a small cardboard box in the garage and placed 4 items inside it carefully. The first was a key to a studio apartment I had found and rented 2 days earlier. It was in a less desirable part of town, small and cheap, but it was what I could afford, and I wanted them to know where I had gone, even if I never intended to let them in. The second item was a stack of overdue bills that my parents had been ignoring for months, bills that I had paid with my money while they spent freely. I left them as a reminder of the financial reality they had been avoiding. The third item was a printed copy of the business suspension notice for Carter & Company. The state had already processed my LLC withdrawal, and my father's business license was now under review. It would take weeks to resolve, if it could be resolved at all. The fourth item was a birthday card. I spent a long time choosing the right one from the grocery store. I finally settled on one with a simple floral design on the front. Inside, I wrote in my careful handwriting, "Happy belated 21st birthday to me. Here is my gift to the family. I have returned the freedom you always wanted. You are now free from the burden of my existence. Enjoy building your life without me funding it. P.S. Do not look for me. I have nothing left to say to you." I placed the box in the center of the empty living room floor, right where the coffee table used to be. It was impossible to miss. Then I took one last walk through the house I had grown up in, the house where I had felt invisible for so many years, and I felt nothing but relief that I would never have to feel that way again. I locked the door behind me and drove to my new studio apartment. It was tiny, barely 400 square feet with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette, but when I walked in and locked the door behind me, I felt safe for the first time in years. This space was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could walk in without permission. No one could use me up and discard me here. I spent that night unpacking the few belongings I had taken from my room, setting up a small workspace by the window, and planning my next steps. I knew my family would be home in 3 days. I knew there would be fallout, but for that one night, I let myself simply exist in the peace of my own space. My family returned from Las Vegas on a Tuesday afternoon. I know this because Leo had been monitoring the situation, checking their social media, and keeping me updated. Tiffany had posted several stories from Vegas showing fancy dinners, casino visits, and networking events, but there was a noticeable absence of posts about the actual investor meeting. That, Leo pointed out, suggested things had not gone well. He was right. According to a mutual acquaintance who lived in my old neighborhood, my parents arrived home around 5 p.m. to find their credit cards declined when they tried to pay for a taxi from the airport. They had to use my father's personal card, which barely had enough limit left to cover the fare. Then they walked into their house and found it gutted. I was not there to see it, but Leo's friend gave him a play-by-play based on what she could hear from the street. My mother apparently screamed. My father was shouting about calling the police. Tiffany was hysterical about her missing equipment and clothes. It took them almost an hour to find the box. When they did, there was a period of silence that the neighbor said was somehow worse than the shouting. My father tried to call me 67 times in the next 3 hours. I had already blocked their numbers on my phone, but the calls came through on my laptop before I could block them there too. I did not answer. I did not listen to voicemails. I did not engage at all. Then my father called Leo. Leo had been expecting this, and he handled it with professional coolness that I deeply appreciated. He told my father that he was representing me in all legal matters, that any communication needed to go through him, and that my father should seriously consider retaining his own attorney given the potential charges of identity theft and financial exploitation he was facing. My father tried to bluster about how I was his daughter and he had a right to know where I was. Leo calmly informed him that I was 21 years old and under no obligation to share my location with anyone. He also mentioned that if my father continued to harass me, he would be documenting it as evidence of ongoing intimidation for potential legal proceedings. That shut my father up fast. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity and anxiety. I threw myself into building my new life with single-minded intensity. partly because I genuinely wanted to move forward, and partly because I needed to stay busy to avoid thinking too hard about what I had done. I had taken back over $30,000 between the bank account, the sold items, and successful credit card disputes. It was more money than I had ever had at once, and I used it strategically. I paid 6 months' rent up front on my studio apartment. I rented a small studio workspace in a converted warehouse building downtown, where several other artists had spaces. It cost $600 a month but had excellent natural light and enough room for me to really spread out. Then I invested in my art. I bought high-quality materials, better tools, proper storage and display equipment. I upgraded my photography setup so I could take professional-looking product shots. I paid for a website redesign and better branding. I was building Alara Designs into something real, something that could sustain me, something that was entirely mine. But I also started working on something new. I could not stop thinking about everything that had happened, about the way I had felt invisible for so long, and the way I had finally made myself seen in the most dramatic way possible. Those feelings needed an outlet, and they found one in a new collection I started designing. I called it UNSCN. Every piece in the UNSCN collection was designed around concepts of invisibility, emergence, and hidden strength. I created necklaces that looked simple from a distance but revealed intricate patterns when you examined them closely. I designed rings that appeared delicate but were structurally reinforced in ways that made them nearly indestructible. I made earrings that played with light and shadow, sometimes visible and sometimes seeming to disappear depending on the angle. Each piece came with a card explaining the concept behind it. One necklace, which I called Foundations, was described as representing the strength you build when no one is watching, when you are working in silence and invisibility to create something that cannot be taken from you. Another piece, a cuff bracelet called Emergence, symbolized the moment you step out of the shadows and refuse to be overlooked anymore. The work was cathartic. Every time I sat at my workbench and bent wire or set stones, I was processing years of hurt and anger and finally transforming it into something beautiful and valuable. I was taking the pain of being unseen and turning it into art that made people see differently. I started posting my work in progress on Instagram, something I had never really done before. I had always just posted finished products, but now I shared time-lapse videos of my creative process, close-ups of intricate details, and most significantly, I started writing longer captions about the inspiration behind each piece. I did not explicitly tell my family's story, but I wrote about what it feels like to be overlooked. I wrote about the strength it takes to keep creating when no one acknowledges your work. I wrote about the power of reclaiming your own narrative. I wrote about what happens when you stop waiting for permission to take up space and just start existing loudly. One post in particular seemed to resonate. It was a time-lapse video of me creating a necklace that started as a simple chain and gradually built into a complex geometric design with layers and depth. The caption read, "They thought your silence was weakness. They mistook your patience for passivity. They assumed your kindness meant you had no boundaries. Show them that silence was just you gathering your strength. Show them that patience was you planning your next move. Show them that kindness was a choice you made, and you can choose differently now." That post went viral. Within 48 hours, it had over 2 million views. My Instagram followers jumped from about 3,000 to over 50,000. My Etsy shop was flooded with orders. People were sending me direct messages, sharing their own stories of being overlooked, of finding their strength, of finally being seen. I could barely keep up with the demand. I was working 12 to 14-hour days, creating pieces, packaging orders, responding to messages. Leo had to force me to take breaks and eat actual meals, but I did not mind the exhaustion. For the first time in my life, I was working this hard for myself, and the fruits of my labor belonged entirely to me. That was when Margaret Henderson reached out. Mrs. Henderson was a name I recognized immediately. She owned one of the most prestigious art galleries in the city, the kind of place that had been featured in art magazines and local news segments. Her gallery represented established artists, people with MFAs and international exhibitions on their resumes. I had never imagined she would even know who I was. Her direct message was brief and professional. She said she had been following my work on Instagram for the past week and was intrigued by the UNSCN collection. She wanted to know if I would be interested in meeting to discuss the possibility of a solo exhibition. I read the message 3 times before I believed it was real. Then I called Leo in a panic because I had no idea how to respond or what this even meant. Leo helped me craft a professional reply expressing interest, and 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Margaret Henderson in a coffee shop near her gallery. She was elegant in a way that came from confidence rather than trying, probably in her early 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to assess everything with artistic precision. She did not waste time with small talk. She said she had been watching emerging artists in the area for years, and something about my work had caught her attention. It was not just the technical skill, though she said that was evident. It was the emotional narrative behind the pieces, the way each item told a story about transformation and strength. She asked about my background, my training, my artistic process. I was honest with her, explaining that I was largely self-taught, that I had studied art at community college but had never completed a degree, that most of my learning had come from experimentation and YouTube tutorials, and sheer determination. Mrs. Henderson smiled at that. She said some of the most interesting artists she had worked with had unconventional paths. She asked about the UNSEN collection specifically, about what had inspired it. I hesitated. I did not want to unload my entire family drama on this professional woman I had just met. But something about the way she was looking at me, with genuine interest and no judgment, made me feel like I could be honest. I told her a version of the truth. I said the collection was inspired by a period in my life when I felt invisible, when my worth was measured only by what I could provide to others, and that creating these pieces had been part of my process of reclaiming my identity and establishing boundaries. I said each piece represented a different aspect of that journey from invisibility to emergence. Mrs. Henderson listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly and said that kind of authentic emotional resonance was rare and valuable. She said people connected with art that came from genuine experience, from transformation that the artist had actually lived through, rather than just conceptualized. Then she made her offer. She wanted to host a solo exhibition of the UNSEN collection at her gallery. It would be a 6-week exhibition with an opening night event that would be invitation only, attended by collectors, journalists, and other artists. She would handle all the marketing, setup, and logistics. I would be responsible for creating enough pieces to fill the gallery space, ideally 25 to 35 pieces, including both jewelry and some larger installations, if I was interested in expanding beyond jewelry. The opening was proposed for 6 weeks out, which Mrs. Henderson acknowledged was an aggressive timeline. She said she understood if I needed more time, but there was a slot opening in her schedule due to another artist postponing their show, and she felt the momentum I currently had on social media could be channeled into generating significant interest in the exhibition. I should have asked for more time. 6 weeks to create 25 to 35 pieces plus installations was barely feasible even working full-time, but something in me needed this. I needed to prove that I could do this, that I was more than just a viral moment, that my art had real value beyond social media engagement. I told Mrs. Henderson I would do it. We shook hands, exchanged contact information, and agreed to meet again the following week to discuss specifics. When I left that coffee shop, I felt like I was floating. This was real. This was happening. In 6 weeks, I would have a solo exhibition at one of the most respected galleries in the city. I called Leo immediately, talking so fast I was barely coherent. He was thrilled for me, but he was also concerned about the timeline. He made me promise I would take care of myself and not work myself into the ground trying to meet the deadline. I promised, even though we both knew I was absolutely going to work myself into the ground. The next 6 weeks were the most intense period of my life. I essentially lived in my studio workspace, sometimes not going home to my apartment for days at a time. I had a camping mattress in the corner and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks and pre-made meals that Leo forced me to accept. I worked 16 to 18-hour days, creating piece after piece, pushing myself to explore new techniques and ideas. I created 32 pieces of jewelry ranging from delicate everyday pieces to bold statement works. But I also pushed myself into new territory. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned installations, and I had an idea that would not let go of me. I created 3 large mixed-media installations that incorporated jewelry design into broader artistic statements. The first was called Invisible Girl, a life-size wire sculpture of a female figure that appeared translucent and fragile from a distance, but was composed of thousands of tiny interlocking pieces that created incredible strength through connection. The second installation was called Breaking Points, a series of picture frames containing photographs of empty spaces in houses, bedrooms, kitchens, dining rooms, but with jewelry pieces positioned where people should be, suggesting that objects had more presence than the person who created them. The third, and most ambitious, was called Emergence. It was a large canvas covered in layers of newspaper clippings, family photos with faces obscured, and credit card statements, all sealed under resin. Embedded in the resin at strategic points were jewelry pieces that looked like they were breaking through the surface, emerging from the chaos and documentation of a life lived for others. I barely slept. I existed on coffee and adrenaline, and the desperate need to prove something, though I was not entirely sure what or to whom. Leo visited when he could, bringing food and forcing me to take breaks. He was worried about me. I could see it in his eyes. But he also understood that I needed this. 3 days before the opening, Mrs. Henderson came to my studio to review the work. I was terrified she would be disappointed, that I had misunderstood what she wanted, that my vision would not match her expectations. She walked through my studio slowly, examining each piece carefully, sometimes picking up jewelry to look at it from different angles, standing back to take in the installations from various distances. I stood there, barely breathing, waiting for her assessment. Finally, she turned to me and smiled. She said this was exactly what she had hoped for and more. She said the work was powerful, technically impressive, and emotionally resonant in a way that would generate significant interest. She said she was going to send her installation team the next day to carefully transport everything to the gallery for setup. I almost cried from relief. The day of the opening, I woke up in my apartment after actually sleeping in my own bed for the first time in a week. Leo had insisted on it, even coming over to make sure I actually went to sleep at a reasonable hour. I woke up feeling nervous and exhausted, but also strangely calm. I spent the afternoon getting ready, taking my time for once. I showered, did my makeup carefully, and put on a simple black dress that I had bought specifically for this event. It was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of thing that would let the focus stay on the art rather than on me. I wore one piece from the UNSIN collection, a necklace I had created called Transformation. It was a silver chain that started delicate at the back of the neck and gradually became more intricate and bold as it reached the front. The centerpiece looked like wings emerging from a cocoon, symbolic of the entire journey I had been through. Leo picked me up at 5:30, giving us plenty of time to get to the gallery before the 7 p.m. official start. He looked surprisingly formal in a dark suit, and he gave me an encouraging smile as I got into his car. He said I looked amazing and that I was going to knock everyone's socks off. When we arrived at the Henderson Gallery, I almost did not recognize it. Mrs. Henderson and her team had transformed the space. My installations were positioned as focal points throughout the gallery, dramatically lit to emphasize their textures and details. The jewelry pieces were displayed in custom cases with individual spotlights, each one positioned to show off the intricacy of the design. There were programs on a table near the entrance, featuring professional photographs of my work alongside my artist statement. There were small cards next to each piece with titles and descriptions. There was a small stage area set up with a microphone where I would be expected to give remarks. It looked professional and prestigious and completely surreal. Mrs. Henderson found me standing frozen near the entrance, taking it all in. She put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said this was my night, that I had earned this, and that I should let myself enjoy it. People started arriving at 6:45. First the collectors, well-dressed individuals who moved through the space with practiced assessment, studying pieces closely and conferring in low voices. Then journalists, identifiable by their cameras and notepads. Then other artists from the community, some whose work I had admired from afar. Then people I did not recognize, drawn by social media buzz and word of mouth. By 7:15, the gallery was packed. There must have been over 100 people crowded into the space, all there to see my work. I felt overwhelmed and amazed and terrified all at once. Mrs. Henderson appeared at my elbow and said it was time for me to speak. She guided me to the small stage area and handed me the microphone. The crowd quieted down, turning toward me expectantly. I looked out at all those faces, at people who had come to see art that I had created from my own pain and transformation, and I felt that icy calm settle over me again. I knew what I wanted to say. I introduced myself and thanked everyone for coming. I thanked Mrs. Henderson for believing in my work and giving me this opportunity. Then I started to talk about the UNSIN collection, about what it meant to feel invisible, about the process of finding your voice when you have been silenced, about the strength it takes to establish boundaries and demand to be seen. I was about 3 minutes into my speech when I heard a commotion near the entrance. I knew that voice before I even looked. It was my father, and he was yelling. The crowd parted and I saw them. My father, red-faced and furious, pushing past people trying to stop him. My mother, pale and shaky, following behind him. And Tiffany, her phone out like she thought she was going to film content from this disaster. My father was shouting that I had destroyed the family, that I was a selfish brat, that everything they had done was for me. People were staring, some confused, some alarmed. Security was moving toward them, but had not reached them yet. For a moment, I felt that old instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make myself small. But then I looked around at the gallery full of my art, at the people who had paid to be here, at the life I had built in the wreckage of my family's exploitation. I held up my hand, stopping security from immediately removing them. I wanted to handle this myself. I stepped back up to the microphone, my voice calm and clear, amplified through the gallery sound system so everyone could hear. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Richard and Catherine Carter and my sister Tiffany. They are not just my family. They are the primary inspiration for the UNSEN collection you see tonight. This collection is about being used, being exploited, being treated as invisible, and finally finding the strength to step out of the shadows when you have nothing left to lose." I looked directly at my father, and I felt no anger, just a cool detachment. I said, "You asked what I did. I simply took back what was mine. My name, my credit, my money, my identity, my future. You spent years treating me like a resource instead of a person, like an ATM instead of a daughter. You used my birthday to fund my sister's dreams with my money. You ate my birthday cake and left me crumbs. You made me invisible in my own home." I paused, letting that sink in. I said, "So I made you see me. I took back everything you stole and built this. I turned your neglect into art. I transformed your exploitation into a career. And now you are standing in a gallery full of people who paid to see work that exists because you taught me exactly what it looks like to be invisible and exactly how much strength it takes to become impossible to ignore." I turned to security and nodded. I said, "This is my space now. Please escort them out. If you have any further communication for me, you can direct it to my attorney." Security moved in efficiently. My father tried to argue, but Mrs. Henderson herself stepped forward, her voice ice-cold as she informed him that if he did not leave immediately, she would call the police and press charges for trespassing and disrupting a private event. My mother was crying, those performative tears she had always used to manipulate situations, but they had no power here. Tiffany looked around at all the cameras and finally seemed to understand that this was not a moment she could spin into content. This was consequences. They were escorted out while journalists took photos and videos. The glass doors closed behind them, and the gallery was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then the entire gallery was applauding, and several people were cheering. Mrs. Henderson came up to the stage and took the microphone. She said that sometimes art comes from joy, and sometimes it comes from pain transformed into power, and that what we had just witnessed was a demonstration of why this collection was so important. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversations, congratulations, and sales. People wanted to talk to me about my work, about my journey, about their own experiences with toxic family dynamics. By the end of the night, over half of my pieces had sold, including all 3 installations. The jewelry collection was almost completely sold out, with several people putting deposits on pieces that were still pending completion. Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside near the end of the night and told me that she wanted to represent me long-term, that she had already been contacted by collectors in New York and Los Angeles who wanted to commission work, and that I had a future in this industry if I wanted it. I signed with her that night, right there in the gallery, surrounded by the physical evidence that I was no longer invisible. The aftermath of that night rippled out in ways I could not have predicted. The confrontation with my family had been captured on multiple phones, and by the next morning, clips were circulating on social media. The story spread quickly, a made-for-viral narrative about a young artist who had been exploited by her family and transformed that exploitation into a successful art career. I became a minor internet sensation. My Instagram following exploded to over 500,000 within a week. Media outlets reached out for interviews. I was invited to speak on podcasts about setting boundaries and finding your artistic voice. The UNSEN collection was featured in art magazines and lifestyle blogs. My family's destruction continued without my involvement. My father faced criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud, eventually taking a plea deal that involved substantial restitution payments to me, probation, and community service. Carter & Company dissolved completely, unable to recover from the loss of business license and the scandal. My mother, who had never worked outside the home in 20 years, had to find employment. She ended up as an administrative assistant at a dental office, earning a fraction of what she had been accustomed to spending. She tried to reach out to me several times, leaving voicemails that alternated between apologies and accusations, but I never responded. Tiffany's influencer career collapsed entirely. Without access to equipment, without funding for her lifestyle content, and tainted by association with the family scandal, her follower count plummeted. She had to get a job at a coffee shop, the kind of service work she had always looked down on. She made a few attempts to rebrand and come back on social media, but the internet has a long memory, and people were not interested in supporting someone who had benefited from exploitation. I felt no sympathy for any of them. They had made their choices, year after year, conversation after conversation, birthday after birthday. They had chosen to see me as a resource rather than a person. Now they were experiencing what it felt like to have that resource removed. My own life flourished in ways I had never imagined possible. Over the next several months, I moved from my tiny studio apartment into a beautiful loft in the Arts District. It had high ceilings, massive windows that flooded the space with natural light, and enough room for both living and working. I bought furniture that I chose myself, art for the walls that I loved, everything curated to create a space that felt authentically mine. I received commission requests from across the country. I created custom pieces for clients, each one a unique expression of their own stories and transformations. I started teaching occasional workshops on jewelry design, sharing my techniques with other artists. I was invited to participate in group exhibitions in other cities. Mrs. Henderson introduced me to other artists in her network, and I began to build a community of creative people who understood the value of art that came from authentic experience. These were people who saw me, really saw me, as a person and an artist, rather than as a resource to be used. Leo remained my constant throughout all of this. He graduated from law school and passed the bar exam, eventually joining a firm that specialized in family law and financial exploitation cases. He said working on my case had shown him where he wanted to focus his legal career, helping people escape from situations where they were being used by people who were supposed to love them. Our friendship had deepened through everything we had been through together. He had been there for the worst moments and the best moments, and somewhere along the way, that friendship had shifted into something more. It happened gradually, naturally, two people who had always understood each other finally acknowledging that understanding had evolved into love. We started dating about 4 months after the gallery opening. It was easy and comfortable and felt inevitable, like we had been moving toward this all along but had needed time to get there. Leo was the first person in my life who had consistently shown me that I had value beyond what I could provide, and that foundation made everything else possible. One evening about 8 months after my 21st birthday, Leo and I were sitting on the balcony of my loft. The city stretched out below us, lights twinkling in the dusk. It was one of those perfect early autumn evenings when the air was just cool enough to be comfortable. Leo had brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate some good news. I had just signed a contract with a boutique in New York that wanted to carry my jewelry line, a major step in expanding my business beyond individual commissions and local sales. He poured 2 glasses and handed me one, settling into the chair beside me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us looking out at the city. Then Leo raised his glass and said, "Look at you now. From invisible to unstoppable. Do you ever regret it?" I took a sip of wine and thought about his question. I thought about that girl who had stood in an empty kitchen on her 21st birthday, holding a bank notification and feeling like her world was ending. I thought about the fear I had felt taking those first steps to reclaim my identity, the nights I had cried alone in my studio apartment wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I thought about the guilt I had initially felt, the way I had been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries was selfish, that demanding respect was ungrateful. I thought about the slow, difficult process of unlearning those beliefs and accepting that I deserved better than what I had been given. Then I looked around at my loft, at my art hanging on the walls, at Leo sitting beside me, at the life I had built from nothing but my own determination and talent and refusal to remain invisible. I turned to Leo and said, "I did not destroy them. I just stopped being their shadow. They collapsed under the weight of their own lies and exploitation. And me, I finally got to be myself." Leo clinked his glass against mine, and the sound rang out clear in the evening air. He said that was the most honest thing I had ever said. I looked at my reflection in the glass door behind us. I did not see the forgotten daughter anymore. I did not see the girl who baked birthday cakes that no one acknowledged, who funded other people's dreams while her own went unrecognized, who made herself small so others could feel big. I saw a woman who had taken her pain and transformed it into power, who had set boundaries and refused to accept less than she deserved, who had turned invisibility into a platform and exploitation into art. I saw someone who had learned that being kind to yourself sometimes means being ruthless with people who take advantage of that kindness. The storm had passed, and the sky was clearer than it had ever been. You know what I learned through all of this? That being kind to yourself sometimes means being ruthless with people who take advantage of that kindness. That family is not just about blood, but about respect, love, and reciprocity. That you can survive losing everything if you refuse to lose yourself. So, here is my question for you. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because they refused to see your worth? Drop a comment below and let me know your story. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because everyone deserves to know that being invisible is not a permanent condition. It is just the darkness before you learn to shine on your own terms.